Good morning, this is Julia Fine.
I'm Akira.
And I'm Ellie, and this is Global News.
Let's get started with the origin and definition of the term financialization.
The term financialization started to gain traction as a more frequently used term in the early 1990s. That being said, the fundamental concept of gravitational shift toward finance in capitalism, which is financialism is based in, has been around since the late 1960s.
Well, the true pioneers to recognize the trend of financializations were Harry Magdoff, a prominent American socialist commentator and editor, and Paul Sweezy, a Marxian economist, political activist, publisher, and editor, both of whom co-edited the Marxist publication Monthly Review.
Now, the question remains, what exactly is financialization? Financialization refers to the increasing importance, size, and influence of financial markets, financial motives, financial institutions, and financial elites in the operation of the economy. The theory takes both a micro and a macro level examination of the growing weight of finance in the economy.
Let's take a deeper dive into that. Financialization's principal impacts are to 1. Elevate the significance of financial sector relative to the real sector. 2. Transfer income from the real sector to the financial sector. And 3. Contribute to increase income inequality and wage stagnation.
Akira, what is the difference between the real sector and the financial sector?
Great question, Ellie. That real economy refers to real economic transaction of an economic and oftentimes refers to the flow of goods and services. The key to the real sector is the concept of gross domestic product, or GDP, which is the market value of all final goods and services produced within the country in the given period.
So that's the real sector. And now the financial sector is the section of the economy made up of firms and institutions that provide financial services. This sector comprises a broad range of industries, namely banks and investment companies. Basically, the financial sector covers the circulation of money and other documents that represent ownership or claims of ownership of real sector goods and services. So, for example, bonds or stocks.
Okay, so to clarify, financialization is an economic paradigm where the conversion of real economic value into financial instruments and their exchange within the financial system comes to dominate economic institutions and activities, right?
Yes, and through financialization, the financial industry converts any work product into an exchangeable financial instrument that can be traded and ultimately managed through the financial system.
So basically, profit making occurs increasingly through financial channels rather than through trade or commodity production.
Yeah, exactly. And you can think of financialization as the virtualization of real economies. One important concept to understand is securitization. So securitization is the process of taking an illiquid asset and transforming them into a security that then can be traded. As well, on a broader level, financialization can be seen to mark a transition from a traditional form of industrial age capitalism that was based on the physical means of production as the primary source of capital, power, and value creation to a new form of information and services that are based in financial capitalism.
Well, thank you so much for the good explanation for our viewers.
So now we're going to hand things off from the studio off to Emile, who's in the field, speaking to experts on financialization. Over to you, Emile.
My first guest is Dr. Benjamin Duparc, professor of economics at Oxford University. He specializes in the resulting wage stagnation and growing income gap that comes from financialization. Dr. Duparc, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Emile.
The pleasure is all mine. So now, tell me first, what is income inequality?
Okay, so let me explain to you this way. For every dollar earned by an average US worker, how much would you guess a top CEO earn? Maybe $30 or $40? And no. In fact, a top CEO actually makes $800 for every dollar earned by the average worker. That's a lot. And basically, Wealth or income inequality is the unequal distribution of assets among the population.
So the question remains, how did we end up with such a huge wage gap?
Well, one reason is the growing popularity of paying executives with stock instead of salary. Before the 1980s, CEOs were paid a fixed salary like all other workers. But then there was a major shift toward financialization, where Wall Street schemes to move money and take fees based on transactions made unprecedented profits. Now, almost 84% of CEOs' annual incomes come from stocks.
So fascinating to see the shift towards financialization. Now, can you tell our viewers why this is so important?
Well, no, CEO care mostly about stock performance instead of improving the company and providing better wages and benefits for workers. The era of financialization has witnessed a disconnection of wages from productivity growth, raising serious concern regarding wage stagnation and widening income and wealth inequality. To maximize their income, CEOs attach a brining plan for increase the price of their company stock. They use companies' money to buy back stocks instead of paying employees more fairly or investing in research and development. When shares are pulled out of the circulation by the company, the existing shares become more valuable. So, for example, say you have 100 stocks at $1. When you pull 50%, then you have 50 stocks worth $2. The CEOs who own the shares that are still in circulation makes more profit as a result. This leaves little room to CEOs' profits to give workers a fair salary, and frankly is self-serving to the CEOs. It also leads to monopolization, which swells profits for this major corporation and helps top CEOs, which reduces the demand for additional investment opportunities.
So, what is the effect on this for the average person?
Well, for household, this has enabled greatly increased borrowing, which leads to debts between 1973 and 2005, which is the era of financialization. Total debt in the United States rose from 140 to 328.6% of GDP. Financial sector debt also grew much faster than non-financial sector debts, so that financial sector debt rose from 9.7 to 31.5% of total debt over the same period.
Interesting. What has driven this debt?
Well, that's exactly the problem with small wages that are disproportionate to what CEOs are making. Compensation has become detached from productivity growth during the era of financialization, since CEOs are paying wages based on the stock performance. The stagnation of wages has been accompanied by raising income inequality.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Duparc. This has been incredibly fascinating and educational. Back to you in the studio.
Well,
Ellie.
thank you, Emile. That was incredibly interesting. So what Dr. Duparc just explained about how CEO behavior contributes to monopolistic corporations is what Sweezy referred to as one of the three most important underlying trends in the recent history of capitalism.
What specifically were other?
Well, as I mentioned, one is the expansion of monopolistic multinational corporations. The second is the slowing down of the overall rate of economic growth. And the third is what he referred to as the financialization of the capital accumulation process. And he underlined that these three are heavily interrelated.
In what way?
Well, as Dr. Duparc explained, monopolization tends to swell profits for the major corporations. Sweezy said that this also reduces the demand for additional investment in increasingly controlled markets. The logic is more and more profits, fewer and fewer profitable investment opportunities. A sort of recipe for slowing down capital accumulation and therefore economic growth, which is powered by capital accumulation.
Do you have any examples of this?
Well, an example of increased monopoly-based finance can be seen in Brazil, where the main focus has been to attract foreign investment to pay off external debts to international capital.
To paint it even more detailed pictures, I'm going to throw things off to Emile in the field. Off to you,
To
Emile.
understand the consequences of financialization, we need to understand why these consequences occur. So to explain this, we have the pleasure to welcome Claudio here. He is the chief economist at the World Bank Group. So hi, Claudio.
Hello, Emile. Nice to meet here with you today.
Hello, Claudio. Thank you so much for your time. We understand that financialization can lead to increased debt, changes in income distribution, and increased income inequality. But what exactly are the factors that entail these changes?
Well, firstly, it's important to understand the mechanisms that are at work in financialization. The financial sector works through three distinct conduits. The first conduit concerns the structure and operation of financial market. The second conduit concerns the behavior of non-financial corporations, while the third conduit is quite self-explanatory as it concerns economic policy. All of these conduits interact with each other. Economic policy affects the structure of financial markets and changes corporation behavior. And corporations also lobby to affect economic policy.
Okay, so through these three conducts, we see the economical consequences, right?
That's correct. The first conduit, financial markets, has been visibly altered financialization, shifting both in structure and operation.
All right. So how so?
The importance of credit and debt is at the center of the current work on financialization. However, at its infancy, it concerned the effect of change financial assets and liabilities, and the macroeconomics effect of financial innovation and deregulation as proposed by American economist James Tobin. Nowadays, there is more and more focus on a post-Keynesian approach to the growth effect and increase in indebtedness, increase in the profit share, shift in income away from workers, and lower retained profits of corporations. Thus, by changing the focus of the financial through economic literature, it has pushed the market to favor financialization.
What ways then corporate managers respond to the financial market?
As the financial market tend to prefer that corporations use debt to finance their activities, corporations have adopted this approach as it has tax advantages and it increases leverage, which means potentially the rate of return on capital. With the Wall Street demand for higher return rates from corporations, mechanisms that help increase returns are favorable.
So when you said that the three conducts interact with each other, what you just mentioned is a strong example of this, right? Then economic policy must put down a lot of legal framework that can either push or pull the economy in different directions. How does this last conduct have an effect on the economic outcomes?
Well, financial sector interests, supported by other business interests, have promoted a policy framework favoring their agenda. That framework has uncapped financial markets and facilitated their expansion, yes. And it has also helped the corporation shift income from labor to capital to the benefit of financial sector interests. Through the neoliberal framework, there has been a large shift on how policies view workers and how they are supported, which challenges workers from all sides. and it puts continuous downward pressure on wages.
Very interesting. So these contacts and their interactions, they help paint a clearer picture of why income inequality has increased.
Indeed.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your educating explanation. Back to Julie.
Well, thank you, Emile. So what an interesting and educational newscast this has been.
Financialization is truly tied to globalization, and that we are experiencing the formation of one of the first truly worldwide complex systems that interconnects all of the global economies. For example, offshoring allows firms to diminish their input costs and shrink the scope of their productive activities, which then reduces their productive investment and operating costs. Such reorganization frees up financial resources to increase share buybacks and dividends in order to satisfy shareholders. The internationalization of sales and financial operations contributed to both companies' continuing capacity to provide high returns to shareholders. Financialization both sustains and propagates itself through the power relationships framed by the globalization process.
And with that, it's time to sign off. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time, this has been Ellie,
Akira?
Julia,
bringing you global news.